Hello and welcome to section 3.3. Today we're going to look at carbon compounds. Ultimately, we're going to look at what chemicals of life are made from, what the role of carbs play in cells, what lipids do, what determines the function of proteins, and what are nucleic acids. When looking at the building blocks of cells, the parts of a cell that are made up of large complex molecules are typically called biomolecules. Now, the large complex biomolecules are usually built from smaller, simpler repeating units that are arranged in a certain way. The basic unit of most of the biomolecules contain an atom of carbon. Okay, carbon atoms can form what we call covalent. Remember, this is when they share electrons. So carbon atoms form covalent bonds with as many as 4 other atoms. Now this picture here just shows us different ways in which carbon can bond. Okay, each line on the graphics represents a bond. So you can see we can go horizontally, we can have different shaped rings. We have what we call single bonds. If there's 2 lines, there's a double. If there's 3, there's a triple bond. Okay, now sometimes instead of writing all the hydrogens around the outside, we could just write something like this, and if we have it in the ring shape, we can assume that there's hydrogens hanging off the sides as well. The ring shape structure, as you can see right here, okay, this is what we call a carbohydrate. Okay, and these are usually molecules that are made up of sugars. Now typically a sugar contains a carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it does it in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So 1 carbon to every 2 hydrogen to 1 oxygen. Now here we have glucose, and glucose is a common sugar that's usually found in grape. Okay, and you can see that we have C6H12O6, or 1 to 2 to 1. And again, sugars are building blocks of the carbs or the carbohydrates. Now, when we talk about carbohydrates, we have different types. Okay, one is glucose. Okay, and glucose is what we call a monosaccharide. Remember, hopefully you guys have been taught this, but when you look at the prefix mono, okay, mono means one or a single sugar. Okay, so monosaccharide means a single sugar. Now, if we take 2 sugars and we actually link them together, this is what we call a disaccharide. And the prefix di indicates that there's 2. Then, if we're going to start linking multiple sugars together, then we're going to use the prefix poly, because poly means many. So our monosaccharides and disaccharides are considered simple carbs, but then if we start linking more and more together, we end up with polysaccharides. These are considered complex carbs. So at a quick glance, you can see right here, these 2 right here are what we call a monosaccharide. So we have an individual sugar here, and we have an individual sugar here. When these 2 sugars are connected, okay, then we end up with what we call a disaccharide. So this right here is a disaccharide. And if we start grouping multiple chains together, like you can see, here's one. Let's highlight. So here's one. Here's another chain, here's another chain, and these are all linked together. And here's the final chain. So because we have more than 2, this is what we're going to call a polysaccharide. Now, one of the things that should be noted is that cells use carbs for sources of energy, structural materials, and cellular identification. Now, as the year progresses, we're going to start talking about more and more of this stuff in detail too. Okay, carbs are also a major source of energy for many organisms, including humans. Now looking at two specific types of carbs, we have what we call chitin and cellulose. These are complex carbs, okay, and their job is to provide support. Chitin is found in the shells of insects and cell walls of mushrooms, okay, while cellulose is found in the cell walls of plants. And again, we'll talk more about this throughout the year. When we're looking at complex organisms, cells recognize neighboring cells by short branch chains of different sugars units on their outer surface. So this right here is going to conclude our part 1 video on carbs. Come back tomorrow and we will watch the part 2.